Okay, so I will talk for about 50 minutes, which will bring us up to 3 o'clock, and then that will give it at least half an hour for questions. Okay, so thanks for inviting me, John. I've been here several times, not to give a talk, but to listen to talks, and the work that John and his colleagues are doing here to do with sound and sound art, and is very impressive, and it's, you know, part of the scene, part of the kind of culture, which you, as students who are, as I understand it, are mainly interested in sound art, yeah, are going to be the next generation of, okay? And that's an exciting position to be in, because there's a lot of exciting work going on, and so you're joining a field which is both has an interesting history to it, but is also comparatively young. Okay, so I really want to encourage you in your sound art pursuits, and therefore I'm happy to give a talk like this. My background, I'm currently, and I have been for several years, at Goldsmiths, is Department of Media Communications and Cultural Studies. We've added that last bit on just this year. And there I have, like everybody else in an academic institution, a teaching responsibility, where I teach an MA program. I convene an MA program in scriptwriting, and I convene a second MA program in cultural studies. So those are my areas of teaching, and also the cultural studies allows me to think through some of the issues that are raised with sound art, actually, in many respects. And I'll explain how that happens. But I haven't been a teacher or a researcher. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, John, thanks. It's only comparatively recently that I came into the academic fold, as it were. Before that, for very many years, I made films, like this one, which was shot not so far from here in Peckham, called We the Ragamuffin. And I specialized, it turns out in retrospect, in basically reggae musicals, right? Which is quite a niche. And then next slide, please. Then in about, we're celebrating 20 years ago, I made this film as a writer and director called We the Ragamuffin. If you hit it again, we'll get a little bit of music on that. This is one of the tracks. And come here. This was shot in Harlesden, and I commissioned all the tracks that told the story. Northwest 10, Harlesden. A bit more volume, please. It our hands and we just can't lift it. Well, Northwest 10 we a make a move, and we not a thing figure pro. We just a step it in a Northwest 10, and a big up all the massive pan every ends. We left from Chalkhill, Ghana, and Easton. We left from Easton, touching a wheels then, buying a St. Props, and in a church end. Walk over the bridge and drop in a Harlesden. We walk up on the rise and come back again. But then me buck up in the Babylon gym again. Okay, thank you. Lose the music, please. Okay, so that was an example. It's very specific. It's talking about particular streets, particular areas, right? And it's really from my filmmaking that I got into sound. I'm sad to say, when I was a director, I took less interest in sound than I should have done. Right? Okay, so it was musical, so that was a connection, so that was good. But it's since then, and using the research that I did for films like Baby Mother in Jamaica, as well as in Harlesden and in Peckham, that I was able to understand the importance of sound, and particularly, which is relevant for sound art, the intensities, the affective nature. I mean, you get that well recognized with opera, right? That you can go to places, you can go to depths, that sound reaches places, as they say, that other media don't necessarily reach. And so that got me into the whole field of the importance of sound, and in particular, the importance of the sound systems. Reggae sound system, dancehall sound systems. So what I'm going to do in the first part of this talk is tell you a little bit about what I found out about sound systems, right? And then I'm going to literally use or explain how I've used my research knowledge on Jamaican and British sound systems as an inspiration and a kick-up, and in fact, a source, the source of my knowledge about sound and how to make that work in a gallery kind of setting. So the important thing about this knowledge is it's very much kind of rooted on the streets. The talk is from street technology, and I use that term advisedly. It's not a kind of corporate technology. It's one that's made, hacked, DIY'd, right? On the streets of Jamaica, and also in England and in the north of England and in Huddersfield in particular. Where, yeah. What? Huddersfield? Well, you're from a great place. The history of Jamaican technology is not in Jamaica. It's all been updated and modernized. It's in Huddersfield. Then, do you know Paul Huxtable? Brilliant. Okay, look, you have knowledge amongst you. Cool. And yeah, and so next, please. What I'm going to do? Yes. What have we got here? Yeah. Oh yes, and I RAC Books. There's Sonic Bodies came out a few years ago. I've got another one called Sonic Media, which is coming out Duke University Press. So I keep the research thing going, right? And academic publication, as well as the actual practice. And for me, as a human being, it's really important to have those two sides of me kind of expressed. So next, please. Okay, so in Jamaica, I worked for many years with a particular sound system that, if you know your Jamaican sound systems, which some of you might, it's called Stone Love. Stone Love movement. And and that is a very long-established sound system. I think it must be like 45 years old or 40 years old. So we're talking about a tradition that isn't just sprung up overnight. It actually has a very deep root in the culture. Next, please. And I should mention this chap, Headley Jones, who arguably is the inventor of the sound system in the 1940s. Very interesting story. You can read about him in various books, Headley Jones. And he was an RAF radar engineer in the Second World War. Right, and really interesting. He repurposed his understanding of frequencies that he learned by doing radar to basically modify what was an ordinary telephone pickup and put that on a board with strings over it, and that became the first electric guitar. Right, so he's a bit of a hero for me. Right, next, please. So that's Headley Jones, and then he's a hero. This is. Yeah, this is sad actually. Neil McNeil, Horace McNeil, was one of my key informants, right? And so in that book, Sonic Bodies, next please. He was very proud when I gave him back the book that I'd written, which included him in his photograph. And he was, unfortunately, when I went back to Jamaica last year, I'd found that he'd been murdered. I mean, we don't want to. I don't want to romanticize the sound system scene. It is very. It's from the ghetto. It's in the ghetto. It lives in the ghetto. Torrington Place, which is, if anybody knows Kingston, is just on the edge of Anytown. And a deal went wrong. He'd repaired a sound system set for someone, and they didn't want to pay him, and they came with a gun. I mean, that is what we're dealing with. But on a positive side, but what that speaks to is the kind of intensities of what we're dealing with. Emotional intensities, the plus and the minus. So I never want to forget where this culture comes from and the privilege that I have going in as a researcher, giving respect, because that's what it's all about, to the engineers, so that they will share with me their knowledge. In fact, they're very happy to chat with someone, because basically sound system engineers are not taken very seriously in Jamaica, even within the sound system scene. And the whole point of writing books about these guys, or based on their knowledge, is to give respect to the understanding that they've developed over generations. And it's a particular kind of understanding. They can read circuit diagrams, they can read textbooks, right? So, Horace had been to engineering college, right? So they're au fait with all the standard kind of stuff, but they have a different kind of knowledge as well, right? So it's an intuitive, it's an embodied, it's a tacit, I call it a way of knowing. A way of knowing through their bodies, which is situated, and this is where precisely the research into the sound system sort of goes in with the idea of doing academic research, that one informs the other, and to be able to take it seriously. Okay, and that knowledge in Jamaica, we call that other kind of knowledge, non-epistemic knowledge, we call it science. I spell it with a Y rather than a science, which is basically black magic or obia. Because what these guys are talking about is how the frequencies work with the body. Because what they're doing, they're actually tuning through the, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the tuning and stuff. They're actually tuning the sound system to stimulate in a very positive and interesting way our bodies and the organs in the body, right? And that is science. That's the magic of it. It's like I haven't got a picture of it, but the chakras in Eastern systems. So we're talking about a subtle science, right? And that shows, if you like, what is missing from the standard engineering model, right, of sound, because it doesn't. It's positivist in one sense. It doesn't take into account the experience of the sound, because that's not an objective, measurable kind of thing. So if you go into sound art, but you as sound artists will be dealing precisely with the affect, the experience of the sound. That's really important. So just because it isn't in an engineering book, right, doesn't mean to say it isn't possibly the most important thing that you have to deal with. Anyway, so I always start a talk when I talk about sound systems to give respect to the people that gave me the knowledge that I'm now sharing, some of which I'm now sharing with you. And okay, so if we go to the next one, please, John. Yeah, and so I want to tell you just a bit about a sound system. That is building the set. And as you will know, it's an open air kind of situation under the stars, right? And if you go to the next, there are quite a few now to go on with. Yeah, we're talking about a lot of sound, thousands of watts, right? And that is one of the key features. I'm going to talk about this set. If we're talking about this set, is actually the volume. And in my writing, I call this what's produced with something that's capable of pushing that set of speakers is what I call sonic dominance. Right, sonic dominance. That's to say, other senses are, if you like, suspended in the face, in the ear, in the feel of the sound. And that is very important, because what we're talking about is what is a kind of a liminal experience, a threshold experience. You can go at the other extreme, you can get minimal liminal, but this is maximal liminal, right? And that's very important if you want to really engage with the audience, right? And you want them to be able to explore parts of themselves and parts of their relationships that they're in that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Because when the sound is that level, it's not painful because it's all beautifully tuned, as I will show you. But at that level, you can't be ironic, right? You've just got to be there. It's an embodying experience, and that is very, very important. Next, please. Yeah, and it's literally on the street outside. Next. And we go shuffle through quite quickly. And so the tarmac becomes a dance floor. A shopping mall, an open-air shopping mall is taken over, a car park, any space, because the whole point of the sound systems, they're peripatetic, they move around. You have regular nights every night at a particular venue, but you also, they have to shift because it's kind of like, it's literally a nocturnal kind of life. It's a nightlife. It starts earliest, if you want to ever turn up at anything, it would be about 1 o'clock in the morning. Right? And it goes on through till dawn. That's very important. And then just to show you about this thing about science and different kind of understanding, then you go off straight to church. Yeah. So we're talking about a different kind of sensibility. We haven't got this sacred, profane thing that divides Western thinking, right? We've got an embodied, intuited, felt way of being with others, and that's absolutely critical in session. Okay, that's great, John. Yeah. And these are And basically, when music at that level, any music, but you have to move. So dance is obviously an absolutely critical component of the thing, particularly with dancehall as distinct from reggae music. Yes, and so we go on. And it's guys as well as girls. Yeah, that's Bogle, who invented dance. Next, yeah. And that takes you to places you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. Right, which seems to be expressed there. Yes, and next. And you get the dance crews, which practice in between the dances, so it becomes a way of life. Next, please. And it is, as I'm emphasizing, multi-sensory, because what tells you that you've got Beanie Man, this is quite an old thing. Bogle, I mentioned, is a dancer you just saw still of. But John Hype, he's a dancer as well. So they're advertising dancers on this literally the same level as the star, which is interesting. Next, please. And then there's often screens put up between these big speaker stacks, right, to basically put a visual loop into the sounding, and that's important. Okay, well, yeah, right. Okay, so the sounding. So I've talked about. I want to talk about how the set is configured. That was the session, right? What happens on the session on the street? The set is configured in a particular way, which is basically with the speakers pointing in on the crowd. So it's a completely different conception than the standard PA, which is either left and right, either side of the stage, right? And this became really inspiring for me about how to create this sonic space, right? And you do that by or one of the ways that they do it is by having at least 3, if not 4, big speaker stacks pointing inwards. And if you go to the next, so I've just done a little sketch of that. That's a particular dance. It was a Passa Passa in Tivoli Gardens, downtown Kingston. It doesn't go on anymore. You can see right in the middle, at the back there, that speaker stack, right? And there's one on the right and one on the left. And if you play that, we should get some music.
Street again. Now go look no friend. Step on street again. Now go beg no friend.
What's so special about me? Why they can't eat up? I don't wanna be no target. Now go brag no show off. Every time they see me, they wow. Trying their very, very best.
Okay.
To control
Next, please.
Lord, Lord, Lord.
Oh, yeah, right, you're on it. Great, thanks. Okay, so that's the configuration diagrammatized a little bit, right? And next, please. Okay, so we've got a horizontal configuration, which is spatialized so that the crowd is in the middle. And just to emphasize that point, that is so different. What we as the audience are doing is putting ourselves inside the music. Right? And that is obviously, well, I like to contrast that with what we do when we've got headphones or in-ear kind of stuff, where we're putting the music inside of us. Right? Now I think that's a big deal. It changes how we are with the music, right? And if you're in the music, then you can share that space, that musical, that sonifying, sonic space with others. And that is critical because the whole point of a sound system is a very standard phonographic technology, but it's repurposed for sharing, right? It's the opposite to the individual, consumer model where everybody has to have their own, which is great if you want to flog, gadgets, and it's great for the corporations. But if you're at a street level, if you're a street technology, you want to repurpose stuff to make it work for everybody. Right? And so that business of being inside the sound with others is critically important. Also, it's because you've got to gauge how you're feeling and how other people are feeling, right? You can get in sync, not just in terms of dancing, but in terms of gauging whether this is okay and it's very, it's convivial, right? We have a word in Jamaica, livity. It's the way of living together. Right, which if you're in a down-pressed situation in a ghetto, you need to share stuff because it just isn't enough for everybody to have their own. Okay, so I've talked about the horizontal configuration, the stacks were in the sound, right? But then what they do, which is I think also very clever, is a vertical dimension of the sound in terms of frequency. Well, that's the Pink Floyd one that some of you are not old enough to remember, right? Where you're splitting a light spectrum. If you go on. Okay, but in the Jamaican sound systems, they split the frequencies in five ways. So each of those columns, those stacks, has the sub, has the bass, has the lower mid, has the upper mid, has the horns, and has the tweeters. Well, that's 6 actually. Anyway, so if you go on, yeah. So that's again. diagramming. So you've got your decks, just as normal phonographic thing. There's quite a lot still played off of vinyl. That's becoming fashionable again in Jamaica, which is nice to hear here. The desk, you can see how that diagram works. So, and the key thing there, and you will know this because you presume you do some engineering as well for your sound stuff, yeah? That is to have the crossover before amplification, just to make it an active system, right? So because we know that amplifiers are most efficient on a limited bandwidth, frequency bandwidth, and so that's exactly what they do. Okay, so you've got at least 3 of those. Next, please. Yeah, and so yeah, my sort of crayon drawings. What we're trying to do is to just visualize how we hear there in terms of and that's what I mean about a vertical frequency distribution, right? That very naturally the tweeters being the lightest and smallest are on the top. In fact, back in the day, they actually literally put tweeters in the trees, right? Because the things outside you've got trees, and so to get the effects, right, to get that vertical kind of thing. So you've got that way and whoop, up like that, right? And so basically that's another way of being inside the sound, which is, yeah, anyway, next please. Okay, so that's just a bit artistic. Next please. Yeah, okay, so I've talked about the session a little bit. I've talked about the set and how the key principles, but the other S for sound system dancehall is the scene. And that is a picture from Rotterdam, which is a festival now in Spain that has been going for about like 20 years. And it's the biggest reggae festival in the world, right? And so what has come from out of Jamaica has literally gone global. And that's a very interesting kind of thing. It's not just in terms of the musical genres of reggae and dancehall, particularly reggae on an international market, but the technology. Next, please. I was there this summer. And so this is a bit on the side with my students, PhD students, MA students. We've got an organization called Sound System Outernational, right, which is the way of saying it, outernational, international, where we do events at Goldsmiths and around the place. So that's our logo. So if you just skip through these, it's been going about 4 or 5 years now, or 3 or 4 years. That was the first event, the second event. Yeah, we collaborate with Sound System Culture in Mandy, Samra in Yorkshire next, and that was the second event. So we work with, that's Roots Injection from Bristol, Ras Muffet, Young Warrior, you might have come across, he's local in South East London, Don Letts. Next, please. And that was the last thing. We had a vinyl weekender for 4 days with films and book launches and all kinds of things. The idea of this organization is to bring the practitioners into the college. And you made a remark, John, about it's sort of counter expectation that reggae and dancehall and the systems should be a subject for academic research or academic inspiration, right? And that is the whole point of Sound System Outernational, is to bring the practitioners in with the researchers in the college and in these conversations intergenerationally and between theory and practice. Next, please. And so we're going on. Yes, and that's Tali Lotus. She's performing actually tomorrow night. She's supporting Jar 9. Anybody know about Jar 9? Okay, she's at Village, no, where is it? Subterranea. Got my ticket. No, and so we've encouraged her through Sound System Outernational to build her own set. Come as you are, fantastic. Next, and that's one of our next events, which is in Naples. One of my former PhD students runs a huge set in Naples got a beautiful name, Baba Boom Hi-Fi. Right. Okay. So he's organising the Naples end, and we're wanting to promote and give recognition for the local Naples sound system culture, which is all embedded in the squats. It has been for about 25 years, right? And that's what I mean about Outernational. This vibe, this street technology is going around the world. It is being used, and the squats are obviously politically very progressive, and they're using reggae music, and they're using sound systems to be convivial together and to get their message across. Okay, next. Okay, so just, and there's a bit of theory on it. You'll recognize that perhaps as a nautilus shell. That's a logarithmic spiral. Next, please. And then that's a cochlea. And we all have two of those, right? Which is also a logarithmic spiral. And next. So what I tried to do here in this diagram is to look at the frequency distribution right across from the set to the session to the scene. Right, and I just represented that as a logarithmic spiral. You can see the red kind of wedge there. That's the part we can hear. So faster than that, we've got light waves. Slower than that, we've got the hour, day, week, month, year to generations. And in the next book, Sonic Media, I'm developing a couple of chapters which are called vibration theory, which I'm contrasting with both with rhythm analysis, but also with information theory. Right. Anyway, so that's bringing right now. Let's go on a bit more. What's next? Okay. So so now we get to a bit of sound art. I'm going to play you bits of two pieces, right? And I explain why it's only two pieces as I go along. So we've got, if you remember, this frequency distribution vertically, and the spatial distribution, which gives us an idea, a handle on what sonic space might be. And this is what I'm going to suggest that you might like to think of your work as making sonic spaces, right? And I'm sure you're familiar with some of the literature. Okay, so the idea of having of being inside the sonic field. Inside the sonic space is very important. So I worked for quite a few years with Martin Ware from Illustrious and Heaven 17. You've probably come across him. He's done some excellent work, and we teamed up at Goldsmiths and had a whole series of events. One was this large-scale immersive audio experiment, which everybody survived, and where we on our backfield, the green, we had 4 of those things, which wave field synthesis, is it? Yes, that's right. That was projecting very accurately a sound envelope, which was kind of interesting thing to do. And so it was literally the size of a football pitch. Right, and so that was me taking the what I'd learned from the sound system about creating this sonic space and making it into more what would be recognized as an artistic kind of effort to explore. And I ran a competition for students to remix their work to put on that system. It's very interesting how it works outside, because you've got a mingling of the building site noises and the sound art, because you're outside and you don't quite know which is what. And so that was good. Next, please. And I did various distributed kind of things inside Goldsmiths. That was a circular sound, one of the first ones. Next. Okay, and then this is the first piece I'm not going to play you. Then through my theory research, I got into topology. I'm interested in diagrams, and topology is a kind of mathematics where you're dealing with non-metric spaces. So it's an idea of spatiality which is not measurable. It's in terms of proportion and relationship. And with that, and then from that, I got into auditory topology. Right? How can we make spaces out of sound? Right? And if you go to the next, and then I was commissioned by for a talk series on topology at the Tate Modern. This is 2011, and that travelled a lot to Koch in New Delhi in India. Next. And basically, what I was doing was creating an immersive space. Right, that's just a minimum of 8 speakers. In fact, we used 16, I think, in the tape, to get control of the sound as we would hear it in a room. Right, so this hopefully might be quite interesting for you. So next, that's 8 channel, and then I was using a software which I think is probably now pretty defunct, called 3D Audioscape. Has anybody come across that? I think the 4D, the Ableton stuff, hadn't been invented when I was doing this. But basically, that's the kind of interface you get with the Audioscape. And the idea being that if you've got a sound field, what the software does is to be able to have a sound source anywhere in the field, right? So horizontal, vertical, length, breadth, and that I thought, wow, that's fantastic, right? Because these guys with the sound systems, when they've got their 3 stacks, what they often do with the sound effects is to whiz them round, so to circle them round you, which you can do very easily, right? And so that gave me some ideas. Having control of the sound field within the 8 speakers um, um, gave me the idea of, if you like, of drawing in sound, right? Just like, well, you can imagine if you have a bumblebee or a fly or some object or a model aeroplane, right, which is making a noise and moving around, you can trace, your mind's ear can know exactly where it is and can imagine the trail that it's making. The same thing with you can get that visually, with a sparkler, right? When you whiz it around, you see the after image. So there's a kind of an after, I don't know what the word would be, after sonic image, an after auditory image that your mind is quite readily picks up. So what I wanted to do next, please. Yes, and so that's. The Tate Modern, the top floor where we were was just, you got a nice view of St. Paul's. Yes, and next, yep, and it was a completely sonic experience. It wasn't, there weren't any visuals. In fact, I started off showing them that interface of 3D audioscape, but that just proved to be distraction. That's one of the other things, how in your work, how images work in relation to your sounds. And that's really something you have to think about, because the whole approach, my approach, is a multi-sensory one rather than sound and image, or rather than just sound. And the chap I should have had aside is Bernard Leitner. Have you come across him? I'm sure you have. He's great. Has he talked here? But he does give talks in London. Very, very interesting chap. He was working from the 60s, where you couldn't have any of this software stuff to manipulate sounds. He had 4 walls with 64 speakers on them, and actually toggled the sound from speaker to speaker. That's not what I'm doing. I don't have to do that. But basically, he's said some interesting things, or lots of interesting things in terms of sonic architecture. And there's one particular piece called the sound arch, which to me very well illustrates how, as sound artists, we have to take account of the visuals, right? And basically this, and how he explained that the sound arch is a work outside in a park, and it was a big red arch. So you saw the big red arch, right? From the entrance, several hundred yards away. And so it's sort of unusual, attractive kind of thing. So you walk towards it, and then when you're standing in the arch, you actually hear that it's all embedded with speakers, and it's a sonic art piece, right? But that's how we need to use, because that's what visuals do, images do, don't they? They draw attention and they give direction, right? But that can be used in combination with the sound itself. Next, please. Okay, so what I was drawing, that's a donut, or topologically speaking, a torus. Right. So what I was trying to do, one of the shapes that I wanted to make out of sound, was this donut, this torus shape. So next, please. So what I did was I could make circles and figures of 8 very easily in the horizontal plane, but I could also manipulate the sound in the vertical plane, which we're less used to using, because our acuity 360 is more accurate than our vertical acuity, as it were. And so basically, using the same color scheme, I made a series of circles progressively, so whereby the circle was drawn in sound source, but also in frequency. That's to say that the higher the source was, the higher the frequency, and the lower the source was, the lower the frequency. And very quickly, people got the hang of that. So I started like with one circle around there. So you're in the middle, the room is still there. One circle going like that, and then the next circle to it, and then there are 16 circles, vertical circles, right? And that created quite an well, use this overused word, immersive kind of experience for people, and where they got the spatiality through the sound. There was no visual reference. And what was interesting, and I used white noise for that, because so what the software allows you to do is to sort of make, imagine it's a kind of wire frame that you clothe in different sounds, right? So if you want to, you have to use frequency to make it work best, but also you can use actually different sound sources. So if you have rolling type sounds, right, then it's easier to get circularity. I use for the circular ones, I used a roulette ball, right? The click, 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 click of a roulette ball, which is immediately associated with circularity. So that just helps the listener along to get what you're trying to put across. And so using white noise was quite interesting, right? Because and the shape was interesting, because what several people said to me was that it was the sound of the sea. See the sound of the waves, and even more than that, even more interesting than that, they said, yeah, it was like the sound of the waves, but it's like the first time I ever heard the sound of the waves. So something's going on here. We're talking about the intensities and stuff, about what you can do, what you can make people feel, where you can take people back into themselves through sound, which is what you're doing with sound art. One of the things you can do with sound art, and so that's how I did it. I'm not playing you this piece because it needs at least the 8 speakers, the cube, to do it, and that was slightly beyond what I could manage here this afternoon. But I think you've got an idea of how it is. So that was the first piece that I wanted to tell you about. Next, please. Okay, and then another set of work, which is also scientific as well as creative, as artistic. I'm interested in intensities, sonic dominance, right? I mentioned that. And so the other place that you find very intense sounds is actually all the time that you are basically in the womb, or rather the last 3 months of your time in your mother's stomach, right? And so I went along to a doctor. In fact, she was a doctor of a student of mine, and told him about the project, that I was interested in something that might be called the Sonic Womb, right? And he said, well, why is that? Because most doctors don't think about sound, right? And they certainly don't think about sound before you were born. So this has spawned various projects. Sensing the sonic, that was in Cambridge. I presented that. Next, please. And what's interesting, just evidence for how important this intensive auditory environment is in the last 3 months, because our ears are fully developed for the last trimester, the last 3 months, right? That's to say, the ears are fully developed, but we're not actually, the fetus is not actually hearing through the ears, it's hearing through its whole body and through its skull. Right? And what's interesting is how much they pick up, and that's you can see it's image that the auditory environment of the child to be is very different basically in a French language group in France to in Germany, and that is reflected in the sonogram of their first cries when they are born. So before they are born, they've picked up intonation patterns. Well, I think this is really amazing. They've picked up the intonation patterns of the language group that they're in, right? And so this is stuff. And next, please. And so we developed what we call the fetal filter to be able to emulate the effect of the mother's body for the child. So this is what the fetus can hear, right? So that's just, you can see it's quite simple. It's just a graphic equalization to mimic what we found by doing measurements and looking at the research. Next, please. Okay, and the nearest we can get as adults to that auditory experience of the child, right, before it's born is in a swimming pool. Have any of you been to this wet sounds? This wet sounds. Do it. It's fantastic. It's running on every sort of 6 months or so, right? And what they do is with a transducer, they play music underwater, and you as the audience are in the water, underwater, and you're hearing it in the way similar to they haven't made the connection with fetuses and wombs and stuff, but I have, and what you're hearing underwater is very much like how the baby hears in the womb, right? And that's to do with frequency transmission. It's much faster because the womb is got a lot of amniotic fluid, particularly at the beginning. So there's a lot of water there, and a lot of sounds do get in. So it's the propagation rate in water, because it's denser, is faster. And also the frequency range is greater in that medium, and so it's kind of an interesting thing. Let's go on a little bit. Okay, so I wanted to build an environment where you could hear like the baby hears, and by good fortune, sometimes these things, if you're really on it, just happen. It found that a former Goldsmiths design student had been working on this environment that could be purposed for this for about the last 12 years, right? And so we just met up, right? Next. And so basically, yeah, if you go back one, so the environment is a kind of a pod, right, with transducers you're sitting on, right, and the whole walls of the pod vibrate from the transducers, and there's also some normal auditory vibrations as well. Next, yeah, and what the baby is hearing is there's three, if you like, channels, right? One from the stomach, the heartbeat, the internal noises. Another from the external sounds filtered through the body, and thirdly, the mother's voice. Absolutely critical, because that has a unique route, which is down the spine, that no other sounds have. Okay. Right, and so this is Lee building these things next. Right, and that's what it looked like. And so you actually just one person, it's a monopod, and you climb inside it, and you hear this. Right, and next, please. Yeah, and that's us, the team, the doctor on the right. That's the company Sonic Womb, and we had in Lucerne in Switzerland. We had about 250 people over 2 days having a 5-minute experience in that, and it was very moving. Several of them were in tears because it's talking about going back and the intensities. Next. Okay, so I'm going to play you something from this. It's been a bit too much talk. This is a little village near Naples in Italy, which is called Guardia Sam. And I did a sound art residency there this summer, making use of these things that I've been telling you about. And I will play you a little bit of this, so you can hear it. And that's a Norman castle there. I didn't realize the Normans got that far south. It's a very strange place. It's a little village, and they've got several issues in southern Italy. The poverty is very much greater than in the north of the country, and they've got a depopulation problem. So very, I think, imaginatively, there's a group that's been running a sound art festival called Luminaria, which has been running for about 10-15 years. And what they do is commission sound art and use it to basically to attract people to this depopulating village, right? And so I was fortunate enough to be asked to do this. So if you go into the next, and it's got all the architecture that, beautiful architecture and stuff that nobody wants to live in, right? Next. Yeah, but it's also got something, so much is very similar in many villages across that part of Italy, but it's also got this very strange thing, which is basically a medieval ritual that has continuity literally back to the 13th and 14th century. And they call it the Ritter Centenali. Okay, Ritti Centenali, next. And it's pretty heavy duty stuff. This is flagellation. Right? So every 7 years, the young men of this little village lock themselves in the church hype themselves up and then walk round the village beating themselves to draw blood. Okay? You probably, what's the name of the rose, is it? The Echo film where they have these flagellation. Okay, so next please. Okay, so there we are. This is Luminaria this year. Next please. Right. Okay, so what I'm bringing, so we have quite an intense, because when you're going in as a visitor, as a sound artist, I find, just as with the Jamaican engineers, to show respect to what is going on there, right? And so I wanted to make a piece that was resonating with what I found there. Clearly the religiosity is pretty intense, right? But I didn't want to put that kind of like full on. I didn't want to, I mean, the festival, the Ritter wasn't going on, you know, and I wouldn't want to sort of present that directly, but clearly that very much informed my feelings about the place I was in, and I'll explain to you how that came out. But what I was bringing to it, several elements that I was bringing to my thinking about how to use the sounds that might be available in this village, right, and make them into something that I could present back to the village itself, right, because that's the deal. We were there for about 10 days all in all, right, do the research, do the recording, make the piece, and then have a showcase at the end, which was for the local people, right? And so it's a question of giving something back through sound, which is going to help them perhaps reflect a little bit differently on what they already know. Because sound, as a distinct from image, is very good at making things strange, right? You hear the sound of something and it's less specific than it would be if it was an image. An image, you say, oh, I've got it, yeah, move on. But the sound, you have to wonder a little bit about it. And so what I was bringing to that thinking through sound was the Jamaican Experience. If you press that again, we'll get a bit of Lee Scratch Perry, I think.
Do you read me? Loud and clear. This is Dub Revolution. Music to rock the nation.
Okay, and next please. Okay, so I was bringing my dub sensibility. That's going to be important. I knew that the dub effects were going to be important, right? I also knew that rhythm was going to be important. These are rhythm tracks. So if you click that, we'll get a bit of Diwali rhythm. And next, please. Okay, and then, so we've got rhythm, we've got dub effects, right? But the next thing might surprise you, the idea, well, not the idea, but where it comes from, the idea of looping, right, which is so fundamental to many popular musical forms. And what I found in the research of this, that I'd always thought that Pierre Schaeffer and all the musique concrète was the source of the origin of looping, but it's not. It's this Egyptian chap, right? And his name basically is Halim El-Dab, which is nearly dub. Halim El-Dab, and I've got a reference if you want to follow up on that. That he was working. He's still alive. Just about next, please. He was working with this machine, which is a wire recorder before tape had been invented. He was working in the early 1940s in Egypt, in Cairo, and he was the first person, very persuasively argued in this article by a guy called Fari Bradley, right? So I just spelled it. I'm very keen on this guy. So it's Halim, Halim, L, and then Dabh. Yep. Yeah, that the guy who wrote the tape is Fari Bradley. Sorry? Thank you. Really? I- Oh, look at that. Oh, great. Okay, I didn't know that. Super. Okay. Well, she's got a really good story to tell. I don't know if she's doing it on that, but that is, I think it's important research so far. And she hasn't even started a PhD. Brilliant. Okay, well done, Fari. And so the idea of looping. So if you go next. And the other thing, the last inspiration, and this is a piece that probably you will know, Robert Morris's box with the sound of its own making. Are you familiar with this piece? Yeah, I think it's quite famous actually. But the idea of giving, well, it started off by giving respect to the sound system engineers, right? And actually the process of making was something else I was interested in reflecting in the sonic dimension, right? So we've got rhythm, we've got dub, we've got loops, and we've got making processes. And this led me to, okay, so actually, if you go on a bit, I'm going to and we'll go back to that. Yeah, basically, the two things I decided to record, which are absolutely integral to the life of this small town, is the bakery, right? Baking bread, which is still done on literally an artisanal way. So there I was in my little recording kit. Next, making bread, beautiful bread. And the other thing, bread, and you probably guessed it, talking about sacred things, bread and next, wine. Okay, so so those were my auditory environments that I recorded in the normal way, and then basically looped them and gave them effects. I was using, in fact, I have to admit to you, sure you've got a lot more experience in this than I have, using Ableton Live, right, to put it together. So I had a few days doing the recording, then looping it, and then adding the effects. Now that technology is very widely available and very much used, but for me it was a big thrill because I hadn't done it before. And because, you know, also one of the elements of the whole sound system scene, the sound system session, is the performative element, both in terms of the audience and the MC, the antiphony, the call and response, but the whole thing is a performance of recorded music. And so let's, if you go back a couple, just to that diagram, yeah. So what I was doing, Panifico is the name of the bakery, right? And Filippo is the baker, and basically his grandmother's oven. So I'm basically recording the, you can see it there, recording the baking sounds of flour, water, yeast, and fire, the processing, which is baking, and also looping with Ableton Live, and then performance with a live mix. And then I tried to do a kind of vertical distribution of the frequencies to emulate the sound system. You can see that little picture on the top right there. And that was about basically the making process, also the idea of ascent, of the rising dough, right? And I think you've got it, right? So if we go on to decouple, yeah. Right, okay, and so that's the kind of diagram. I was working with a student, undergraduate student at Goldsmiths, who helped me kind of visualize all that and to understand what I was doing, which was, well, learning curve. And next. Yeah. And so you can see, and I had a live, I'll tell you about that, the live input as well. So I had the loops, had the effects, had a couple of mics that came in at the end. And I was very keen to have the effects specific to 3 frequency bands, right? Again, emulating the sound system kind of configuration. And yep, next. Okay, so that's what it looked like. It was an outdoor evening showing. If you go to the next one, and I want the music here to start, but to be low because I want to talk over it for a bit. Yeah. Okay. So so about, I don't know, it's about a quarter of the crowd there. So about, I don't know, 7,500 people there outside, and it was a showcase where there were 6 of us sound artists made the work, and I just gave a little talk, 2 minutes, about just what I've explained to you about where it came from. And So what you're hearing is a live recording, not from the computer, of the scenes. You can hear the chat. And so I started off quite naturally, if you like, just playing the samples, and then started to dubify them so you may or may not recognize that's a mixing bowl. You may or may not recognize what the sounds are, but that really doesn't matter. Okay. That's the oven burning. Okay, we can take that down. I think that was 3 or 4 minutes. It's just 10 or 12 minutes long. Next slide. Okay, and at the end, contact Mike on a breadboard. We had some loaves of bread from the bakery, which were distributed amongst the audience, so they were able to eat the sound. Right? Okay. So that's next, please. The last piece I'm going to play you. Basically, I've been interested in sonic space, goes very easily into sonic spaceships. right? And so I've been kind of obsessed for several years about sonic spaceships, right? And this what might be what one looks like. Next, please. And Jules Verne version of well, he wasn't a spaceship. This idea of traveling in sonic space, which has got a lot of musical references. Next. Okay, like Parliament, the mothership, right? Next. Like Africa Bambata, the idea of the Zulu nation, sonic nations. Okay, I'm going quite fast on this because I think these are familiar references. Next. And the idea, this is a Helmholtz resonating chamber, what you'd had to do before you had oscilloscopes and ways of measuring frequencies. You had to have glass or brass spheres of different dimensions, which each one reverberated to a particular frequency. Next. And so I started building model spaceships, you know, like I'm a boy. And so that's what happens. So the resonating chambers were table tennis balls. And so next, and oh yeah, you can buy them in science school shops, these resonating chambers, they're great. And so I was building a spaceship on basically propelled by on a principle of resonation. Right, next. Yeah, and that got a little bit more sophisticated still with those little glass vials which were doing different frequencies. So it's a kind of a thought model experiment. Next. And then I did it in CAD and whatever. So I was wanting to build this space that you could get inside, which was a bit like a sound system, but not. Yeah, next. Yeah, and string and wire, I like doing this kind of stuff. Yes, next. And again, and next. And then balsa wood models, very important. Sonic spaceship, and then we ended up here, which is actually real, and you can hear this in Goldsmiths. And this is a Sonic's immersive media lab, right? Which is the same literally the same system as I developed for the Tate. It's a 12.2 system, so it's a ring of 6 around the top and a ring of 6 around the bottom, and 2 subs. And that produces a very immersive, very intensive environment. What you can't see there is also 360-degree projection. All right, next. Okay, and so what I'm going to do now. So got this idea of sonic space. It's multimedia. Sonic space is always visual as well as sonic, right? So the last thing that I'm going to do is to play you basically a story that I wrote for this character, Echo. Okay, so I worked with several graphic artists to develop a visual look for basically a space captain, right? That would explore sonic space. Now, this piece I'll show you is just going to be on a single screen, right? It's actually designed for multi-screen in the Simul. Right, but you can get some idea of it from a single screen. So I commissioned a soundtrack. The whole piece is 10 minutes long, which is, as I say, how I'm going to end by a guy called Ben Houck. Don't know if anybody know him, but again, a Goldsmiths student, to do a sort of ambient dub track. But what I'm doing here is taking the multimedia nature of the dance hall and narrativizing it, going back to my interest in script writing and making films, right? To explore these dimensions, which are outside dimensions, but also inside dimensions of ourselves in sonic space, well, basically to find ways to articulate what I've found in the dance hall and to share that perhaps to different audiences than would be happy to put themselves in the sonic dominance of the dance hall. So what we're going to have to do now is exit that is the PowerPoint and then go to this. Right. I hope. So why doesn't that do it? I want to play this. Ah, that's good. Right, I want to go full screen on it, yeah. Right, so it's 10 minutes and 2 seconds long. And so Captain Echo and her Sonic Warriors are coming up. Can we take the lights down? Yeah. Thanks.
a tunnel. Yes. There is a tunnel. Yes. There is a tunnel.
Great, thank you. So we've got time for some questions, if you like. Go on. Sorry, there's a lady here. Then you. Oh, you didn't tell me that. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It was a really brilliant lecture. I'm definitely from a reggae background and grew up listening to sound system music. I just want to ask you, when was the first time you went to a sound system and how did it make you feel when you went?
I suppose basically my dad started taking us back to Jamaica. I was born here when I was 16, and our heritage is from Port Antonio in Portland, and every Christmas, they have a dance by the. I don't know if what part are you from Jamaica?
No, my parents from St Elizabeth.
St Elizabeth,
Lisbon,
okay,
yeah.
another parish. Anyway, the town square they have a dance at Christmas time, right? And so it's outside Kingston. It's a very cool vibe, right? And that's where I remember feeling this feeling of being inside the sound. And so I must have been about 16 years old, and that set me on a path that I still haven't given up on. Yeah.
That's lovely. Great.
What was it? Can I turn it back? When did you first hear a sound system?
I went to a session when I was about 7 years old.
7, right?
Yeah.
Where was that?
This was in back in Luton. He just did a local session in Slip End, and he had like Errol sound system. I think it's Channel 1 sound system.
Channel 1's still going?
And I remember experiencing the sound and feeling my whole body vibration. But it made you feel happy. It kind of made you feel at home, but it kind of definitely kind of brought your spirits up. But as you said, you was talking about the vibrations as it goes inside your body, and you definitely feel it, and it attracts you to the sound, and it makes you want to hear more and want to hear more different songs, and it's a lot of production, but yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Okay, well that's super. So what's your name?
Esther.
Esther. What Esther has said just is completely in sync with what I've been saying. It's just nice to hear it from one of you. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you. Thanks.
There's one right at the back, and then there was one in, yeah.
I just want to ask you about racial stereotypes, and especially within the Black Caribbean community, the language that's used in sort of dancehall, raga, not so much reggae, but in bashment and sort of modern forms of Caribbean music, they reinforce negative stereotypes. They're very misogynistic. There's sort of reverse discrimination going on. And really, just my question is, are the police right to police carnival, especially Rampage, the bigger sound systems, and infiltrate black society in the way they're doing? As you said, your friend died recently in that world, and there seems to be a sort of a lot of violence associated with that side of life.
There absolutely is. There's a lot of homophobic violence. There's a lot of violence generally. There's also misogyny. And and I did mention, to put it in the racial in a stereotype, a dark side that we have to acknowledge, right? We have to acknowledge, but in a way it will be impossible to think of how it could be different, considering where it comes from, considering the hardships of the culture. But to answer your second point, well, both. There's hardships here. And to answer your question, are the police right in over-policing Carnival? No, they are not right in doing that. Are they right to I'll let you come back in a minute. The Form 696 form, was it right that it was repealed? Yes, it is right that it was repealed. And okay, so one of the big issues now is not anymore grime, but drill, as you will know. Right, and what I find quite extraordinary that you down press communities, peoples to such an extent that there is literally no youth clubs. They're getting thrown out of school. There's no jobs. The one thing that they have, that we have, is the music. And what do you say? Oh, yeah, that's to blame for all the badness that we've done, right? And so we have to. And in fact, going on with Sound System Outernational. And we've been approached by BASE, which is the British Association of Sound Systems that operates the static sound systems in Carnival. And we're doing a conference in June, right? Which tentative title is BASE is the place, right? And what we want to do with that is to get some kind of a pushback, or continue, or to link up with the pushbacks that there already are in different scenes against the licensing laws, against the basically the cramping of the scene. And why that's particularly important, and this is the concerns of the BASE organization, association, which are people of my generation, older generation, is because it's so difficult to find a venue, right, that the young people are not getting this, that you had as a 7-year-old, getting this sound system experience. And that is very sad, and that's what we as elders, if you like, are worried about, and that's what we want to be doing something about. And we're working not just with Goldsmiths students, with also up in Hackney, there's a sixth form college called B6, which is very progressive, right? And we're going to bring those students to be recording the event, to be doing research, and to get them involved in the culture, as I've been doing with the events at Goldsmiths with my MA students and PhD students. And that's the way it lives. Yes, I'm not dismissing what you're saying about the negatives. I admit to those, right? But there's also very many other sides to the story. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add to that. I really what I'm sort of getting at is that I heard a policeman speak, a senior English policeman, and he worked London boroughs, and he basically sort of portrayed the Caribbean community as being a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is dominated by hypermasculine and hypermasculinity, and that was really, I didn't agree with him obviously, but that seems to be the reflection that we're giving to the dominant culture.
Yeah. Okay, and that's what we have to do with those are the people we actually have to talk to, the police and the local authorities, the night czar and others such, right, that control the public spaces and the private spaces and the venues, to get a different understanding to that. But it has to be a dialogue, obviously. But it is, and I'd say we got freedom of expression. Well, for me, expression includes bass, right? Anyway, let me take another question. Perhaps we can chat afterwards a bit more.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna ask you because I went to an event and there was a Stone Love actually there.
Stone Love, yeah?
Yeah. And
Here in the UK or in Jamaica?
Yeah. And there was 4 acts and Stone Love was there. And I was just wondering if you think that all like sound systems and stuff. Do you think there'll be a day where like they'll become like less popular? Because I feel like they have their own little scene, which
Yeah.
isn't like exactly like a good thing or whatever. But I just feel like with everything that's going on in the music that's getting popular now, I think sound systems kind of get overlooked quite a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel, because when I went to this event, like, I heard people saying, like, oh, I don't know who Stone Love is, like, no one cared about them or anything, so I was just wondering what your view is on that.
Well, I mean, I think it is in danger of dying out, you know, because it's no use if you have a music that just goes with a generation and, you know, and dies out with that generation. And as I say, the concern is to get it going on. There's a lot of very interesting conversations going on, and that's precisely what we're trying to do at Goldsmiths with the Outernational, is to bring people in the room generationally, where we got Lloydie Coxon, right, one of the founding figures of the UK sound system, sort of sitting in the front row and giving very positive feedback to Tali Lotus of Kaya, right, and saying, go on, sister, look, you're taking it forward. And that is really lovely. And that's the kind of space that a university is still, with everything else closing down, is still able to provide. And I think that's really important. But so there is a danger, but I think given, I'm very encouraged by the work we've been doing with students and other young people, that there is an appetite to know where it comes from. And you say, you know, dying out as itself, but if you look at the influence that sound system culture has had, there's a fantastic show which hopefully some of you have seen, Bass Culture, University of Westminster, which has been, they've got a huge gallery, P3, just by opposite Madame Tussauds, and there's a massive exhibition there, which is in fact closing tonight. I'm going there from here, and if you want to see, and there, and Michael Riley from Westminster, he's got quite a substantial research grant, which he's been spending very well over several years to precisely document the influence of Jamaican music on British culture across the board. And it's really, I mean, it's really interesting. And so, yes, so it's like jazz, that, you know, what happens at the origins, you know, and then it sort of like filters out and becomes taken for granted. I mean, the whole rave scene couldn't happen without sound systems, right? You know? Yeah.
Thanks. My question kind of follows on from that. I was going to ask about if the sort of relationship from Jamaican sound system music to the UK's illegal rave scene interests you, as that is also very big sort of sound system culture.
Yeah.
You've got, it's kind of a similar thing, albeit maybe different genres of music.
Yeah, absolutely. It does interest me. I haven't got any expertise. I haven't done any explicit research on it. But it is this idea of creating a sonic space which is outside society, what Hakim Bey would call a temporary autonomous zone, right? Through sound is, yeah. And what's interesting, because what the project I'm sort of developing is about, like, not follow the money, not follow the music, but follow the technology. This street technology and how it's kind of found its own forms, how it's been taken up, if you like, completely organically because of the circumstances of the community that it found. That's why the Italian squatting movement is so into sound systems, right? Right? In Brazil, all around the world, in India, South Africa, I'm in contact with a lot of different sound systems globally, right? And yeah, and so the genre in way encourages a separation between scenes. But if you look at a phonographic technology with big speakers, and some of them, I've done a little research in Colombia in Latin America, right? And they have Los Picos they have there, right? Which are big sound systems. They don't do it quite in the same way, right? But these guys don't know anything about Jamaican music. It's not inspired by Jamaica. Their reference goes back to Africa directly. Really interesting. And so, yeah, anyway, so rave culture is absolutely part of this history, which is also documented in the exhibition, in P3 just now.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for speaking. Your residency in Naples, I thought, was really enticing, and the whole bread and wine element, which is something which I've not. I mean, personally, I feel like I don't see enough of kind of incorporating food into sound arts, and I wondered, especially with the importance of food in sound system and in sessions.
Drum chicken and.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you wanted to speak on kind of incorporating that extra sensory experience, because I think it talks to the vibrations inside your body and things like that, and yeah, I just wondered if you had more to speak on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're on it. That's absolutely the thing, that we're in a multi-sensory world, and it's unfortunately we can blame Aristotle for dividing up the senses into 5. We've got many senses, and they're not separate. And the term synesthesia is probably one you've come across, this mixing of senses, which has got nothing to do with a medical condition. It's got to do with how we are in a multi-sensory world, in the sensorium. And so I'm totally open to these other things. And in fact, next year in Rotterdam, I'm just in the process of proposing a piece that is going to make use of the setting up sounds of this whole massive festival. I showed you one slide of it, right? With the children's creche and with the food and the radio station, and present that back on a sound system on a nightly basis. That's what the plan is. And so yeah, it's about eating, which is if you like about making ourselves. Right, that what goes in, our nourishment, both in terms of sound and vegetables and bread, is how we are, and that's just to kind of recognize, because I talked about ways of knowing, right, and then the other one which I develop is ways of making, yeah, and the final one is ways of becoming, yeah. And so the idea of emphasizing on the ways, we're not talking about epistemic sort of knowledge things or formal corporate assembly line making. It's how we make ourselves, right? And so obviously nutrition and food is the whole thing in Jamaican culture, the ital, no salt, the natural living, the liberty, what the Rastafarian tradition has given to the reggae music. I mean, so it's such a rich culture in that way. It's very easy to draw on and to find inspiration for work. Yeah,
I fully agree, and I think there's a lot you could speak about to do with kind of the way you can track sound and you can track culture, the way you can track food and flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a beautiful little independent magazine which is dedicated to the plantain. You know that yeah. Which is precisely how that particular food is taken up in Africa, in Latin America, and in the Caribbean. And yes, tracing foods is and how it's cooked differently and stuff. It's yeah, great, thank you.